As a Hashem, this week is the final week of Masechta Nazir, so it's exciting. Thursday is the Siyam. We'll drink a little wine. So let's just talk about what we're discussing over here. Yesterday there was a Mishnah that said, I'm going to bring it up. Hagoyim ein lehem nazirus. That means a goy cannot become a nazir. Why is that? So we're going to learn. The pasuk says, Daber al b'nei Yisrael on the screen. It says here, Daber al b'nei Yisrael, the Amarto alehem. It says only speak to the Jewish people. So we darshan only a Jew could be a nazir, not a goy. So that's clear from the Mishnah that a goy can't be a nazir. Then the Mishnah says, Noshim ba'avodim, a woman and a slave, yesh lehem nazirus, can become a nazir. How do you know that? So, if you ask a kid in yeshiva, he's going to give you three lamdasha terutzim. But the basic teretz is because the pasuk says, ish or isha, a man or woman, could become a nazir. But then an eved is like a woman. An eved knaini is like a woman, right? A goyish slave has dinim like a woman, and she also could become a nazir. But the Mishnah says a noshim are different than a slave. A slave, if the master decides, let's say the master liked that the slave is a nazir, and then a week later he decides, I don't want you to be a nazir. He can say, I don't want you to be a nazir, and then the slave, because he's owned by the master, would be allowed to drink wine and mitamel mason. But if after, let's say, he gets freed from the master, he has to continue his nazirus. So that is one thing, that it doesn't have to be right away, and the owner can decide whatever he wants to stop the eved from being a nazir. But a woman, a husband gets only one shot at goal. He could only be made for his wife's nazirus on the day he heard about it. And if he says he doesn't want her to be a nazir, so she's no more a nazir, and even if they get divorced, she doesn't have to keep her nazirus, because a husband, can nullify her nazirus. Fine. So that's just the book. But the point over here, we're going to get to discussing the other points today. But hagoyim ein lehem nazirus. A goy doesn't have a nazir. Now, I want to bring up another screen, and then we'll get to the Gemara. The Gemara is discussing that there is another topic in the Chumash called erechin. What's erechin? A man wants to donate to the Beis Hamikdash the equivalent value of a human being. So there's a vower and a vowee. A vower means the person making the neder, and a vowee is the subject of the neder. What is the subject of the neder? A man says, I want to donate the equivalent value of a male Jew, a male person who's 20 years old. So then the Torah is a chiddush, that the Torah gives you the exact prices for every level of a person. If it's a male, if it's a female, it depends what age, if it's a baby. So that's a subject in the end of in Parshas Chukas. There, the Torah says, "Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe, el Neimar." God speaks to Moshe, saying, "Daber el bnei Yisrael." Speak to the Jewish people. So already you're going to say a Jew could be involved in the parsha of Erechin and not a goy. So let's go with Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. Rabbi Yehuda is of opinion over here that says this Jew, when we're saying it only applies by Jew, it's not really complete, because the pasuk says later, "V'yamartu lehem ish ki yafli neder," a man who expresses a neder be'erkachov nefashos l'Hashem. He wants to donate the equivalent value to God. If it's a male, from 20 to 60 years old, give this amount, 50 shekel, 50 shekel. If it's a woman, 30 shekel, 30 shekel. If a woman between 20 and 60. Okay, etc., etc. So one pasuk says, Yisrael, it applies by Jews. Another part of the pasuk says it's like a neder, that it means it can apply by even goyim, because a goy could make a donation. Let's say a goy wants to bring a carbon to the Beis Hamikdash. A goy could bring a carbon to the Beis Hamikdash. So how do you resolve these two? So Rabbi Yehuda says that the pasuk means to say that a goy could be Myrach. In other words, he could donate the equivalent. He could be involved as the vower of Erechin, but not to be the subject of an Erech. In other words, if somebody says the value of this goy I want to give to the base of Migdash in Erechin terms, then that's not a good expression. He doesn't have to give anything. It's only if you say the value of this Jewish kid, of this Jewish 20-year-old, then it works. So a goy could be Myrich and not be the subject of Erechem. And it's very similar to, let's say, somebody who is, you don't know if he's male. Let's say you have a Jewish guy who's a tumtum. You don't know if he's male or female. So in that case, we say that person can make an Erechem, but cannot be the subject of an Erechem, because you don't know if he's male or female. But he can be a Jewish guy who's androgynous or a tumtum. He can be a vower, not a vowee. So that's what Rabbi Yehuda's opinion is. Okay, so let's just deal with Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. Now let's just go to the Gemara, and we're going to discuss from Meir in shortly. But Samach Beis Amar Aleph, we're starting from the second line. Here we go. Okay, here we go. Ish kiyafli neder be'erkecha. The Torah says if a man expresses the neder be'erkecha in the equivalent, right? That's the subject of erechem. Why does the Torah say bu'ish be'erchen lamali? You see, as I pointed out, that really there is one exclusion, because the Torah says daber el bnei Yisrael, right? As you see it on the screen. But then the Torah says two inclusions. One is neder, and one is ish. Ish means it applies to every human, and neder means it applies to goyim also, because just like goyim are in the parsha of nedarim, so also they're in parsha of erechin. So you have two ribuyim. So that's the Gemara's question. Michte, let us examine this. Ishkas erechin and nedarim. Erechin is juxtaposed to be like a neder. Erechin is the equivalent of a neder. The Amakra, the pasuk says, "Ish kiyafli neder be'erkecha." The Torah calls erechin a type of neder, and v'atanya gabe nedarim. And then we learned by neder that what ish matamad loimam. It says the Torah describes the neder that the Torah has a parsha in the Chumash called parsha nedarim. Guess it's in Parshas Matos. Vaydaber Moshe el Roshei Matos. Ish. If a person makes a neder, lo yachel devarei. Okay, you can't violate that. So ish, the Torah says ish. Every human, l'rabas is a goyim. That over there it includes goyim, shein noidrim, nedarim, and nedavos Yisrael. They can make donations, and they can make a donation or a neder, or nedava, or a gift like a Yisrael. So if so, once I know that erechin is like neder, I automatically know that a goy can be an erechin, right? So if that's case, ish kiyafli ba'erechin lamali. Why does the Torah write another riboy called ish, that every human can be in the parsha of erechin? Of course, every human can be in the parsha of erechin, because you are marba already from the word neder by the parsha of erechin. The word neder includes goyim. So what is this again? The question of the Gemara is dealing with is this word, ish. What is ish coming to be marba over here? That's the question. Ella, says the Gemara says, Hi ish meboyle li'isuye mufla samach leish. That means that the Torah is telling you that you don't have to be 13 years old per se to make a neder, to be bar mitzvah. You can actually be 12 if you can express yourself. Mufla means you're ish mufla. You're a person that understands what the severity of a neder is. Who are you making this neder for? If you're such a person, even if you're only 12 years old, your neder takes effect min ha-Torah. That's what ish coming to be marba. Okay, so that's the extra ish by erechin is marba. Even a 12 and a half year old could make a neder. So the Gemara says, and a pra erechin also. And once you know it by erechin, by the way, because erechin and neder are both the same, right? They're all in one the same. Sorry. Once you say that the 12-year-old can make an erechin, he could also make a neder. So back into the Gemara. So the Gemara says, it all makes sense according to the opinion mufla samach leish daraisa, that a 12-year-old boy who's very precocious can make a neder. That has a source from the Torah. That's the source. According to the opinion that a 12-year-old can make a neder is only derabanan. What is that? What is that coming to be marba? I mean, it's not marba 12-year-old, because a 12-year-old it doesn't take effect with the raisa. Answers the Gemara, Li'isuya, very interesting answer. Mufla samach li'ish the goy. By Erechin, mufla samach li'ish works. That means, let's say a goy who's 12 and a half year old. He's 12 and a half year old, even though a Jewish 12 and a half year old cannot make a neder, cannot make an Erechin. A goy, 12 and a half year old, could make an Erechin, could make that kind of a vow. That's the Chiddush of the Torah. Now, why should something not work by a Jew can work by a goy? How does that help? Because a Jew, when he comes bar mitzvah, has this violation called layachel devarai. So really, he could only make a neder where he can potentially be over the aver of layachel devarai. Therefore, that only applies only after his bar mitzvah. But once before his bar mitzvah, since he gets no aver of layachel, his nedarim don't take effect. But a goy, he never gets this aver of layachel. He's always a goy. So the Torah tells you that not only an adult guy, probably a 13-year-old guy can make an Erechin, even a 12-year-old guy, even a 12 and a half-year-old guy who knows what he's doing, his Erechin takes effect. And therefore, we collect on that. We collect the money on that. So now the Gemara established everything is perfect. Let's go back to the Nazir Psukim. Yisrael, Daber al B'nai Yisrael, that a Jew can be the subject of a Erechin. He could be the Vawi. Ish kiyafli neder be'erkacha teaches you that a goy who's just like he can make a neder, the goy could also be the vower of an Erechin. Ish comes to tell you is not just a 13-year-old goy can be the vower of an Erechin, but even if they're 12 and a half, they can make the vower of an Erechin. Now, there is another opinion that learns the opposite. That Reb Meir, who said that a goy cannot make an Erechin. He cannot be the vower, but he can be the vawi. Just like you have a shoita, a katan, Rameir, a shoita cannot be an imbecile, cannot be a Jewish imbecile, cannot make a vow, but they can be the subject of this Erechin. If a person says this Erechin of this imbecile, this 20-year-old imbecile, I'm responsible, they could be the subject of the Erechin. So what the guy has to give that money, the chamishim shekel. So Reb Meir says a goy can be the vawi, but not the vower by Erechin. So then it doesn't make sense. The Gemara says that this ish would not make sense according to Reb Meir. Why? Because what are you telling me? That this ish is marba 12-year-old could be the subject. The 12 and a half year old can be the merach, the subject of the vow of Erechin. Even a baby can be the subject of a vow. The Torah says, if a baby, a 30-day-old baby can be the subject of the Erechin. Certainly a 12-year-old. So that's the Gemara's next question. Everything makes perfect sense. Laman di Omar, according to the opinion, Bnei Yisrael Ne'arachim, the only Jew can be the subject of a vow, like of the vow, that can be the vowi, right? Which is Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. Ve'ein hagoy ne'arachim, and a goy cannot be the subject of the Erechin. He could only be the vower, not the subject. And therefore, we're saying that. So yochel lo yehi maruchin. I would think a 12-year-old cannot be a vower. Only a guy who's 13 years old can be a vower, but not somebody who's 12 and a half. It's Talmud Loimer. That's why the pasuk tells you ish chape tells you that even if the guy is only 12 and a half years old, he could be the vower of an Erechin. According to Reb Meir's opinion, that a guy can never make Erechin. He can never be the vower of an Erechin. He can only be the subject of an Erechin. So then, what is Ish going to tell you? That a 12-year-old can be the subject of an Erechin? That makes no sense, because even a baby can be the subject of an Erechin. The Chumash says that specifically. Elaman diyama, Bnei Yisrael marichin. That only a Jew can be the vower of Erechin. Bein a goy marichin, but a goy cannot be the subject of a vower of Erechin. You're going to tell me that the Chumash is telling you, I might think a 12-year-old cannot be the subject of the Erechin. Talmud Loima Ish. That means Ish, that even a 12-year-old can be the subject of an Erechin. Wait a second. Afilatinik ben chodesh bar erukehu. Even if a baby's just 30 days old, the Chumash says you could be the subject of an Erechin. It doesn't matter. Age doesn't matter. So then we're back to square one, according to Rameya. Kiyafli lamali. What is this ish coming to include? This ish. The Torah says by Erechin, Dabel b'nei Yisrael. Only speak to the Jewish people. According to Rameya, Yisrael is telling you, it's limiting it, that only a Jew could be the subject of the Erechin, not a goy. The Vawi could only be a Jew. Ish kiyafli neder means that a goy could be also the subject, that a goy could be the subject of an Erechin. So now the question is, what is Ish going to tell you? So back into the Gemara. So the Gemara says, Amar Rabba said, Lasuye, this means to exclude. This Lasuye means to exclude Goy Gadol. The Afagav, the Goy Gadol, any Yadei Lahaflis, if a Goy, we're just telling you that the Goy, according to a mayor, by a neder, a Goy could make a neder, right? That by Erechin not, by a neder, he could be. So we're telling you that if the Goy, who's an adult, who's not so precocious, doesn't know who he's expressing the neder to, who he's responsible for the neder, even if he's an adult, the neder is not valid. So really, it has nothing to do with Erechin. This ish kiyafli means you have to be a man who has intelligence, and it's telling you that by neder, even though the pasuk is by Erechin, that by neder, if the goy is doesn't know exactly who he's making the neder for, that neder is not valid. You see, a Jew, even if he's over bar mitzvah, he's not so precocious, and he doesn't know, never went to yeshiva or anything like that, as if he's an adult and makes a neder, the neder is still in effect. The neder takes power. By a goy, it's limited. Only if there's a goy that knows Yodea lahafli, he knows who he's making the neder for, then it takes effect. But if he's a goy that does not know, even though he's an adult, it would not take effect. Okay, so now the Gemara just now goes to another point. There's a pasuk that says by Nazir, Ish kiyafli lindar neder. Ish means any human can become a Nazir, right? But then the Torah says it only applies by Jews, not by Goyim. What are we going to be marba from kiyafli lindar neder Nazir by Naziris? That's the Gemara's question over here. New question. Ela kiyafli de kosev rachmona gabe Naziris. Why does the Torah write ish kiyafli by Naziris? Lomali, what is that coming to teach you? Michte, let us see. Any new halacha that you're going to teach me by Naziris, I know it already. Why? Because ha'iskus Naziris nedarim. Naziris is juxtaposed to nedarim. Whatever applies by a neder applies by Naziris. Okay, and neder is equal to Erechin. So whatever you're going to find by Erechin applies by neder, applies by Naziris. So kiyafli lamali. So what is Yafli going to teach you by Naziris that is so novel, that it's coming to include something that I wouldn't know before. I would not know without that pasuk. So the Gemara says, "La'asuyi yadayim she'enim mechicha." Teach you that a nazir can make a naziris even if it's not definitive. In other words, usually when I make a sentence and I leave out one word, you can fill in that word. And if I don't say that word, that's called a yad. I say it, and you could fill in the word, but you know exactly what I mean. Sometimes I could say a word, and you don't know what it means. By Naziris, it works, according to Abaya. For example, a person sees a Nazir walking in front of him. We had this before. And a person says, I want to be like him. So if all you do is listen to what the guy says, you don't know what he's talking about. You have to see the whole picture over here. So that's called a yadayim she'enim mechichas. The words itself, you can't fill in. So a hey, that means a person says, I want to be like him. The itmar, yadayim she'enim mechichas, if you have a yad, that's not a mechichas, that's not definitive, are you going to become a nazir? Abai amahavi yadayim. That's called a handle, and you do become a nazir. And that's why it says kiyafli, that even if you didn't express yourself totally, but I could figure it out from the context of what you're saying, what you mean, that's enough to become a nazir. Rava amar lo yahavi yadayim. So Rava says, no, that's not a yadayim. In order to become a nazir, you have to be a little bit more expressive than that. So according to Abaya, ish kiyafli is telling you that yad yadayim she'ein mechichos is an effective type of expression to become a nazir. So the Gemara says, okay, according to Abaye, I know what Kiyafli teaches you, that Yadayim Shemechichos, Eina Mechichos is Hava Yadayim. According to Rava, what are you going to say? What is Kiyafli going to teach you? Rava holds that if you say Yadayim Sheina Mechichos, if you say in a high, and the Nazir is walking in front of you, you're not a Nazir. So what is Kiyafli coming to include? Ella says the Gemara, he needs it like Rav Tarfim taught you. Tanya, we learned in our Brisa, Rabbi Yehuda Mishum Rav Tarfim, Ein Echad Mehen Nazir, Lefishi Naziris Ela Lahaflo. Rav Tarfim says, let's say you have two people have a bet with each other. They see somebody coming from at a distance. The guy says, I'm a Nazir if it's Ruvain. And the other guy says, I'm a Nazir if it's not Ruvain. And then the guy disappears. So they don't know who's a Nazir and who's not a Nazir. So Rab Meir says, even if eventually you find out it was Ruvain, let's say you do find out it was Ruvain, so Rab Tarfon says none of them are Nazir, because Naziris has to be right away, I can decide if you're a Nazir or not. Not that I have to wait to Ruvain to come here or that person to come here and decide, oh, your condition was met, now you're a Nazir. Naziris was only given only if it's expressed completely from the very start. So that's what Ish Kiyafli comes to tell you. Halacha about Naziris. The Gemara asks again, okay, now you have an understanding of what Ish Kiyafli comes to tell you. If you hold like Rav Tarfon, El Rabbanim Ma'ikalamema, according to Rabbanim, you're Nazir anyway. If we find out that it was Ruvain, even though when you said it, you didn't know if it was Ruvain, still you are a Nazir. So what is Kiyafli teaching you? So the Gemara says like this, Ella miboyle look at the Tanya. And this is we're answering the final teretz. The question again is, why does the Torah write Kiyafli linder neder Nazir? What is Kiyafli teaching me? It's teaching you that we have a concept called Heter Nedarim Parchim Be'arvid. The Brisa says the fact that a rabbi could release somebody in a neder is not written in the Torah. Somehow it's flying in the airspace of the Torah, but you can't find a real source for it in the Torah. We have nowhere it could land. It's like just flying there with no landing, no pasuk that you could really say this is the definitive source of a rabbi having the power to release somebody from nether. But Rabbi Lezer says, I found a source in the Torah. There is a source. Shnemar, it says in the pasuk, Ish Kiyafli. It says by a Nazirus, or it says by neder, a man has to express a neder. Or by Nazirus, by Erichin, it says a person should express himself when he's saying a neder. And then the Torah says by Nazirus, Kiyafli, it also says you express your neder. Shtei pamin, it says you twice. Echad hafla le'isr, one, you're expressing yourself to make an isr, to make the neder. The echad and one kiyafli is haflo leheter, when you express the neder to the rabbi to get a release. So there is a source in the Torah, albeit very not such a clear source, that the rabbi has a right to release somebody from a neder. And one of the reasons why the Torah did not give you a direct source that a rabbi has that power is because the Torah wants to impress upon a person that how serious what he takes from what comes out of his mouth that he has to keep. He can't just it's not easy to release it. So the Torah didn't definitively tell you a source where you can release a neder. It's hinted in the Torah, albeit that is where the Torah hinted it by writing Ish Kiyafli by Nazir, which implies that sometimes you express your neder to the rabbi in order for him to release you of the neder. Next Mishnah Namad Beis, a little bit further. It's more severe when an Eved becomes a neder than when a woman becomes a neder. Why? Shehu Meferis Ish Didre Ishta. We spoke this out. A husband could nullify his wife's neder and his wife's naziris. The Einai Mefer Nidre Avdei. The master cannot nullify the naziris of his servant. He can stop him and say, I don't want you to be a nazir, but that's only a temporary stop. Because as the Mishnah is going to explain, Heifer ishtoi, if you nullify a husband that nullifies his wife's naziris, Heifer oilamis, then forever. Even after the husband dies or divorces her, she's never a nazir because the neder disappears. Hefer la'avdei, but if the master is not mefer, but what he does is he protests that he doesn't want his slave to be a nazir. Okay, his protest can stop the eved from being a nazir as long as he is the owner of the eved. Yatsa lecheres, when the slave would eventually go free. This is a goyish slave, so let's say he goes free. Either maybe the owner punched his teeth out or blinded him, or he wrote him a shtar shechra. So then mashlim nizirasa, he has to make up the naziris. The neder didn't disappear. He's a nazir still. Tana rabbanim, the rabbis taught lama rabbi kaifel naziris avaloylin nedarim v'le'erechim. The Brisa has a question. And it seems to imply that a master has the power to force his eved not to be a nazir, as long as he's the owner. I don't want you to be a nazir. I want you to drink wine. I want you to be strong. But why is it that a neder and an erechim, let's say a man, eved, makes a neder on not drinking wine, not a nazir. He just says, I don't want to drink wine anymore. There, the owner, the Brisa seems to say that the owner has no right to nullify that neder. Why can he nullify a naziris and stop the naziris and force the eved not to keep the naziris, but he can't force the eved not to keep the neder? So the Gemara says, "Maishno gabe nazir." What are you telling me? He could stop a nazir because the eved had no right to become a nazir. Because the Torah said, "La'asur isal nafshoy." A person who is his own jurisdiction, he has the power to make a naziris for himself. If you own yourself, you're a free man, you could become a nazir. If you own your own body, you could become a nazir. That excludes an eved. An eved cannot become a nazir because he doesn't own his body. It's owned by the master.
Also, if the master wants him to, if he says, I don't want to drink wine, that's his prerogative. But if the master says, I need you to come with me, I'm going to a funeral, and he became a nazir, he says, I can't come. He has no right to do that. That's not his decision to make. But to not drink wine, that's not going to affect his job.
But the pasuk says le'asor isa al nafshoy, that only if you own your own body, you can. That's a pasuk by neder also. Then you can make isurim. You can make, but you don't own your own body, so you can't even make yourself not drinking wine. That's what the Gemara is saying.
He can't even do that. Okay.
That's okay. Wait, this is only the Havamina of the Gemara. So if you hold for a second, the Gemara is going to totally refute this. But ihachi afil legabe nedarim nami, even by a neder, he should not have the power to make himself usher on wine because he doesn't own himself. Amar Rav Sheshes says the reason is that, like you said, the reason exactly, Steve, exactly what you're saying. When it comes to, let's say, a nazir, he says, I don't want to drink wine. He's saying, I'm not drinking any wine. When you're saying you're nazir, I'm not drinking any wine. So the master can say, listen, that affects me. Because if you're not going to drink wine, your heart's not going to be strong, and you're not going to be a good slave. So you can't be a nazir. But if a person says, I make a neder from this grapes, so that doesn't mean you're also on every grapes. So on that type of neder, the master has no power over. That's what the Gemara is saying. Here we're talking about there's one cluster of grapes right in front of the eved. So therefore, gabe nedarim, when you make a neder on this cluster of grapes, the chimitzar bahai, when you make an isser on this cluster of grapes, loy mitzar ba'acharine, you're not prohibiting himself on other clusters of grapes. So therefore, like you said, loy matzi kafele, the master wouldn't be able to force him because he can eat other wine, he can drink he can eat other grapes and drink other wine. Gabe Naziris, the Naziris, since it's more all inclusive, mitzah bahai itza bekule, since when you aser this grapes, you're asering all grapes, therefore matzikafele, the master could force it. So the Gemara asks just two more questions, and then the Gemara is going to fall off from this whole thing. Wait a second. What happens by a neder? V'gabe nedarim, mi lo yaskinin, cannot the Mishnah be talking about the leke elahai ashkel, that the owner has only one cluster of grapes in his refrigerator. The loy lochel, if he's not going to eat it, chalash, he's going to get sick. Maybe by a eved, if there's only one cluster of grapes, then the master wouldn't be. Then by him making this neder not to eat this cluster of grapes, then basically he's answering grapes because there's no other grapes in the house. And yet the master cannot, according to the Brisa, seems to say that the master cannot stop the eved from making such a neder, even though it effectively is stopping the eved is not going to eat any grapes or drink wine. How is that different than Nazir, which gives the master the right to stop Naziris and not by neder? Ella Omar Rava says maybe when it says that the master cannot stop a neder, it's because the eved made a neder not to eat this grape seed. Okay, so what could be so grape seed? So gabe nedarim b'hayhu de mitzulay matzah kafale. Since you're only ushering yourself on this grape seed, therefore the master cannot force him. Gabe nazir, but nazir itzig nami b'achrina. If you with nazir, you're ushering yourself on all grape seeds, matzah kafale, then the master could force you. So the Gemara just says one more try. By not neder, it could possibly be talking about there's only one grape seed, and maybe if the eved swears that he makes a neder, he's not eating this grape seed, and there's no other grape seeds. If he's not going to eat it, chalash, he's going to get weaker. So basically, what the Gemara is asking a very basic question. And the answer to this question is not what you think. The question is, why if the Brisa says, if an eved comes a Nazir, the master has the right to say, I don't want you to be a Nazir. And it seems to what the Brisa seems to say, that if a slave makes a neder, the master has no right to nullify that neder. He has no right to get involved. It's not his business. So the Gemara says, no, Elam Abai, wrong. In other words, a neder, an eved has no right to make a neder in the first place. Listen to this. Lama rabbi tzarch lichpoisai l'naziris. Why does the rabbi have to stop the nazir when the eved becomes a nazir? The ein tzarch lichpoisai l'ndorim. But he does not have to stop the eved when he becomes a neder because it doesn't take effect in the first place. An eved has no right to make a neder, but he does have a right to become a nazir. He doesn't have to stop the shvua because the eved has no right to make a shvua or a neder. My tama, the Amakra, the pasuk says by shvua, which is like neder, lahara lehetiv. A person can make a shvua. This was last week's parsha. A shvua is that you plan to do bad or plan to do good. Maha tava rishus. Just like doing good, you have the power to do good. Af hara rishus. So also the power to do bad. It's only somebody who can make these decisions. Yatsa lahara lachem, but to cause somebody bad to somebody else, she'einu rishus biyadei, that's not your power. And therefore, effectively, every neder that an eved makes affects the master. So an eved can never, ever, ever make a neder. Why? Because by you making a neder, let's say you're not, eved's going to say, I'm not going to drink orange juice. It affects the master because he's going to become a weaker eved. So an eved's bichlal cannot make a neder. Masha'en Kain, on the other hand, a naziris he could make, because the Chumash gives a power to a nazir that you could become a nazir even though you're doing something that you have no right to do. For example, a regular guy who makes a shvua that I'm going to drink wine, and then he says, I make a nazir, I want to become a nazir. That nazir overpowers the shvua. That the extra word in the Chumash that says that naziris will overpower the shvua. So we see that nazir, the nazir neder, is more powerful than a shvua neder. So really, an eved does have the power to make a naziris against the will of the master. On the other hand, the master can say, I don't want you to be a nazir. That we have the right to the master to say, I don't want you to be a nazir while I'm your master. And that the Torah gives a right to a master. So basically, we're going to conclude with there are three steps over here. A neder, an eved can never become a neder. A naziris, the Eved could become a Nazir, but the master has a right to say, I don't want you to be a Nazir, and I'm forcing you to drink wine and Matamala Mason. If the Eved gets freed, he has to keep his Naziris. But as long as he's with the master, he doesn't. And the third thing is by Erechin. If an Eved says he wants to be an Erech, he wants to give money when, an Eved doesn't really have money. So the master cannot, that doesn't affect the master. And the din is the master has it's none of the master's business. And if eventually the Eved does go free, he would have to pay the Erechin. So these are the concepts of masters making a neder or naziris or Erechin. Okay.